بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على ختم الأنبياء وإمام الأصفياء وقدوة المتقين سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the tafsir of Surah al-Hadid, we have reached lesson number 7 and we're looking at verses 18 to 20 بإذن ta'ala. And these verses, of course, build on what we looked at in the previous verses. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the previous verse that know well that it is Allah who revives the earth after it was dead. And this is a reflection on the earth itself, but it is also a reminder of hope regarding the states of our hearts, as we touched upon. So in today's verses, where we're going from verse 18 to 20, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us one of the keys, right? One of the keys to our change, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in verse number 18. إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَّدِّقَاتِ وَأَقْرَضُوا اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا يُضَاعَفُ لَهُمْ وَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ. Right? So in verse number 18, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the great promise to those who give. Right? The great promise of Allah to those who give. Right? إِنَّ الْمُصَّدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَّدِّقَاتِ. Truly, those who give, right? Both men and women, right? And al-musaddiqeen is an emphatic form. And this is hard to convey in idiomatic English necessarily, right? So Dr. Mustafa Khattab translates it in a good way. But to convey the emphasis, we need to note a couple of things. Firstly, in Arabic, the inna is for emphasis, right? Indeed. And this is done as a rhetorical tool to emphasize the statement, right? That the basic statement is those who give have multiplied reward, have great reward. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us layers of emphasis. One is inna, indeed, right? And that emphasizes, right? But then it points to a quality of the type of giving. Innal musaddiqeen. This is those who consistently give, right? Right? Those who consistently give, right? 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 Those who consistently give, or if you consider the various narrations, right? The Quran has come in various canonical recitations. It's the same text, and it's from the marvel of the Quran that you have these complementary qira'at, recitations, and they bring out shades of meaning, right? So within the canonical recitations, you have some of the narrations say innal musaddiqeen, which is from tasdeeq, though truly those who confirm the truth, right? From tasdeeq, confirming the truth, truly those who confirm the truth, right? Such as the truth of Allah giving life to the dead earth after it's come. who confirm the truth of the signs of God. Or that's if you read it, innal musaddiqeen, without a shadda on the sad. Those who confirm the truth. But with a shadda on the sad, al-musaddiqeen, it's from sadaqah. Those who consistently give in charity. And the two are related. Why? Because the giving of charity is a proof of your believing in the promise of God. Which promise of God? The promise of God about Himself. That God exists. His promise is true. Of eternal reward. Right? So His promise is true about the hereafter. His promise is true about reward for the good. His promise is true about the reward of charity. And then there's also emphasis by mentioning innal musaddiqina wal musaddiqat, those who give frequently in charity, both male and female. This is another way of emphasizing. Okay? So it's not just that you could say, well, my husband gives in charity. No. You have your wealth, you give too. Say, well, my wife gives in charity. Because some houses say, okay, look, here is our monthly budget, you run it. Right? Like I spent 3.5 years, had never entered the grocery store by my house. Because I have an intelligent wife. And whenever I go shopping, the bill's 2-3 times bigger than when she goes shopping. Right? When in doubt, put it in the cart. And then you hope that by the time you get to the counter, you'll get rid of what you don't need. But that's between hope and wishful thinking. So, no. So it's not enough, well, she gives charity on our behalf. No. Indeed, those men and those women who give in charity. It also applies to other categories of people. Right? That, well, my parents give in charity on our behalf. But you have money too. Give. And who lend Allah a good loan. Right? What is the good loan? It's your giving in the path of Allah. So sadaqah is what you give to the poor. Lending Allah a good loan is your spending in the ways of good. Right? And this has come before as well. That spending in the ways of good is called, it's as if you give a loan to Allah. In that whether you help build a mosque, or you help build an Islamic school, or you helped establish an Islamic learning project, or you helped establish some way of serving the worldly good for people. Any of these ways of good, it's as if you've given a loan to Allah, which He will repay in the hereafter. How will He pay? How will He pay? يُضَاعَفُ لَهُمْ. It will be multiplied for them. And this is an emphatic form. Why? Because it mentions that it will be multiplied. What is it that is not mentioned that is noteworthy? A very noteworthy thing is not mentioned about the multiplication. How much? Right? How much will be multiplied? And it's important to pay attention to things like this, right? Will be multiplied. Because in the Quran it tells us about good deeds being multiplied. And the charity is like the head of the wheat. Having, each stalk having 7 heads, and each head having 100 grains. So that the good could be multiplied tenfold, up to 700 times, as the Prophet ﷺ made clear, to many times thereof. Based on what? Based on the degree of your intent. The strength of your intention is what governs the multiplication. يُضَاعَفُ يُضَاعَفُ لَهُمْ, will have it multiplied for them. On the basis of what? Of doing it out of faith. إِيمَانًا وَاحْتِسَابًا. Out of faith and sincerely seeking the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't just give like that. Right? That your friend was talking to you, and people have some amazing conversations at funerals. Right? So we're at a funeral for a relative of Umar's, and people exchanging, some people saying very, really noble and notable things and nice touching words about the deceased. Someone else saying, did you hear that you could bury two people in one grave? And then a wife talking, the husband telling the wife that, by the way, don't bury me on top of you. Which actually didn't make sense, because if she's buried already, how, so I was thinking about the logic of that. But, people having all kinds of weird conversations at a place where your duty above all is to reflect, right? But in that, what are you rewarded for? According to your intention. Do it out of faith, and do it out of sincerely seeking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you ran into your friend, they're telling you, oh, by the way, I know this charity that's so good. Sometimes people give, say, okay. Send me the link. And you give. Why? So why did you give? Oh, my friend talked me into it. Now, are you rewarded for that? Yes, you're worshipping a generous Lord. But there's a fundamental difference between someone just doing something just like that. Why not? Sure. But shall have it multiplied for them. Like if you just do a good deed with a basically good intention, Allah has told you you'll get 10-fold reward for it. But it is like a blank check. Your generous Lord, if you don't put anything in the check, what do you want from this? Shall have it multiplied for them. But to the extent that you put intentionality and purpose into it, I'm giving this to seek the pleasure of Allah. I'm giving this out of gratitude to Allah. I'm giving this out of love for Allah. I'm giving this as an act by which I can purify my heart. I'm doing this on behalf, as a gesture of gratitude to my parents, on behalf of someone, such and such person who passed away, on behalf of a teacher who benefited me. You have intentionality and purpose behind it. The same action is beautified. It has greater clarity in why you're doing it in this life, manifest in how you conduct yourself. Right? How you conduct yourself within the action. Because if you do the same act purposefully, in worldly terms, it's different. Right? In worldly terms, it's different. But in next worldly terms, it's incomparable. Right? The two things look similar, but they're completely different. They're completely different. Shall have it multiplied for them, and they shall have an honorable reward. Right? They shall have an honorable reward. Right? Ajrun Kareem. And we've looked at, this is repeated here for emphasis. Why? Allah repeats things for us, and in some sense, because there is in reality no repetition, that one of the aspects of this repetition is to remind us of realities that we forget. One of the realities that we forget in our actions is the next worldly consequences of our actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَتُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةِ, you love the immediate. وَتَذَرُونَ الْآخِرَةِ, and you leave behind the hereafter. Right? So when we think of actions, like someone dies. So you think about, so you're going to attend the janazah. Think of everything you think about. Right? So you're running late. Got to get the kids ready, got to do this, you think about 100 things. Right? The ladies of my house make sure that their face mask matches. Even the little one. Do you make your face mask match? Well, you guys generally wear dark. So we have the dark folk. Like you guys, you generally wear dark colors, right? Pretty much, right? You too. So anyways, so even my little one was like, I need to find my pink hijab, my pink cover. Why? He said, Abuji, you don't understand. You got to make things match. He's like, not even 4. But you're thinking all these thoughts. You're going to the janazah. Why are you going to the janazah? Because someone died. So why are you going? Because they died. Now, if you dig, you realize, yeah, well, I'm going because there's, it's a responsibility. It's this, it's that, but it's buried, right? But Allah reminds us of the next worldly consequences of our actions to remind us, keep them in mind. Don't forget the eternities, right? The eternal truths, right? So here in these, there's a couple of clear lessons in verse number 18, right? That the truth of giving in charity, and one of the reasons of the emphasis on charity, which is for those in need, and giving in the way of Allah, that this is connected to bringing your heart to life, right? And there's many reasons why this is mentioned. One of them being that what is the cause of much of our worldly attachments and our sins, but also our being imprisoned in worldliness? It's self-centeredness. What is our circle of concern? Me, myself, and I. It's like this this mug I saw one morning at a coffee shop that I shall not name because I'm not a fan of it. Someone called me for a meeting at like 8:30 in the morning, which is not when you want to meet me. And they were late. So add insult to injury. And I pick up this coffee, and it says, it's all about you. That sounded like shirk. Right? And you did this. And I'm like, man, this is not the time to. But then I said, okay, it's all about capital Y-U, it's all about Allah. And you did this all from Allah. So I said, I don't mind if my friend's late either, it's all about Him. Okay, so it's a good spirituality lesson in a cup. Made me less upset when my friend showed up late. But it is the self-centeredness that causes us to be imprisoned between our desires and our whims and our worldliness and our paying attention to the shaitan. But by giving to those in need, why would you give to one in need? Because you care for another. Why would you give in the ways of good? Just to lend Allah a good loan by spending in the ways of good? Because you care about the good for God's creation. You shift your attention from me, myself, and I towards others. And that opens your heart to be able to begin to care about Allah. That it's not about you, it's about Allah. But how do you seek the pleasure of Allah? You seek the pleasure of Allah by caring for Allah's creation. Right? And that shift from me, myself, and I to I'm a servant of God. My duty is to seek the pleasure of Allah through devotion to Him and to seek the pleasure of Allah by being of benefit to Allah's creation. That's what shifts our priorities in life and helps give this shift of consciousness from being a mere worldling to being a true servant of Allah. And you see the emphatic pattern to highlight this meaning, right? And we touched upon the multiplication of reward, but not just a multiplication of reward. It says, وَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ, and they shall have a noble reward. Why is the reward noble? Because the one rewarding you is Al-Kareem, is the most noble. So if you seek from the most generous, even think about it in worldly terms, right? If one of these random billionaires, right? So let's say you started a project. If you started a community project, what would you start? Yeah. Just name something. Let's say you started a school. Where would you start a school? Okay, started a school for Afghani refugee children, right? Now, let's say, unasked for, Melinda Gates or whoever, Amazon's founder's wife, met you at a thing and said, what social enterprise are you involved in? I started this school. Said, how much do you need? Here's a blank check. And she meant it. So would you just ask her, give me $5,000? And you know that you need millions to really fulfill your dream project? No. You know, this person's a multi-billionaire. They have an annual philanthropy budget of several $100 million. So how much would you ask for? You ask according to the capacity of the giver. Right? Now, if you go to your friend, you're broke, but she's broker than you are. You might not ask for $100, right? Because she's broke. But if you ask someone who has a lot and they're giving, then you ask according to the one giving. Now, if you consider the absolute Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they shall have a noble, generous reward. So it's Allah saying, seek it, ask. But what do you ask for? What is a reward? Reward is not what you get in this life. Reward is what Allah grants you in the hereafter. And we tend to be minimalists when it comes to the hereafter. Allah make me enter paradise. In this life, you spend all this time wondering about whether you should upgrade your phone to the new model, whatever that's come out. You've read so many reviews about it. You've read everything about, is the camera of this phone or this phone or this phone? You're considering 3 flagship phones. Which one should you upgrade to? Jack, you ask yourself, in the last year, since you upgraded your phone last year, how many pictures have you taken? That you try to take good pictures? A few. So you need to spend $2,000 on a super phone that's better than the one you're not using presently. But we spend a lot of time thinking about the details. You're getting a house. How long do people typically spend looking for a house? Could you just Google it? How long do people typically spend looking for a house before buying it? Months. How many houses do they view? Why? Because they care about it. Right? Yeah, we'll ask Mullah Google. What? 4.5 months according to whom? What website? Yeah, Zillow.com. Whatever. Like people spend months of active searching. And then they spend months planning out the house. They spend months buying the furniture. And this is it's all going. It's not going with you to the grave. So, where do you plan to be in the hereafter? Oh, somewhere. What do you know about it? Oh, nothing. Can you tell me about it? No. Right? But Allah has told us every detail, right? That He has already promised. But He's also told us above and beyond that. لَهُمْ مَا يَشَاءُونَ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. They shall have whatsoever they wish with their Lord. So what do you want in the hereafter? Didn't think about it. Now inshallah, Allah will inspire you to think about it there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. And for that, let's strive those who would strive. Right? So our priorities are skewed. We plan out the details of what smartphone we get, what car we buy, what clothing we buy in the case of some people, what house you rent or buy, where, all these worldly details. What about the hereafter? Right? So take the hereafter seriously. Both know what is promised, but also consider what you want. Right? Consider what you want. Because that's your home. Right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ advised Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar. The Prophet ﷺ put his hand on his shoulder when he was still just a young boy. And he says, "Kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib, aw abiru sabil." Be in this world as though a stranger or one journeying. The stranger is the one who's visiting somewhere. If you go visiting somewhere, do you try to make your life miserable? Have you ever been on vacation? Yeah. Okay. If you go on vacation, do you try to go to the worst possible hotel? Not if you want, so you're a visitor somewhere, you try to make life comfortable, right? Which doesn't necessarily cost a lot more, but just be comfortable. But you don't forget your destination, that you got to go back home. So you go to London, England for a week. So you say, I want to be comfortable. So you spend $1,000 a night on a hotel. And for most of us, that blows our budget for, months. Does that make sense? No. Okay? So you make your life comfortable, but don't forget that this is not your destination. Be in this world as though a stranger. That's one who's stopping somewhere for a little while. Make your life comfortable, but don't forget your destination. أَوْ عَابِرُ سَبِيلٍ, or one journeying, that you're not just stopping here for a while. This is just like you're refueling. Like you stop at the gas station, you get what you need, but you're still journeying. You're still journeying. You're just like the constant traveler who just refuels and keeps going. The Prophet ﷺ said, the Prophet ﷺ would go to sleep at night, and for some periods in his noble lifetimes, he only had a reed mat to sleep on. And it would leave marks on his noble face. It was very difficult for his family and for his companions, and they noticed it. You leave marks and then go. Like, you have some marks when you wake up, it goes soon enough. So they said, we bring you something more comfortable. He said, what do I have to do with this worldly life? My example is like that of a rider on a long journey who stops and takes shade for a few moments under the shade of a tree and then journeys on. Right? And they shall have noble reward. Right? So what are you seeking? And that's a deeply personal question. So think of the consequences of things, right? Because even when we make tough choices in this life, or we're faced by tough choices, one of the things to think about is the hereafter, but not in the abstract. Right? Not in the abstract. Visualize standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment and which choice will be pleasing to Him. But when if you're in, I've been wanting to travel for a while, so that's why this travel related thoughts. But you're in Istanbul and you see some amazing leather, fancy leatherware, and you check your bank balance, you have enough to get it. What would prevent you from getting that $900 leather bag? What would prevent? It may be excessive, but you want it. Let's say you want it. No limitation. You're traveling first class, let's say. That's too practical. Yeah, if you know that you have a budget, right? That, okay, yes, I have 3,000 in my bank account, but there's things I need to do with it, right? So similarly, if you know what you are seeking in this life, you have a plan, and you know why you have the plan, which is the hereafter, right? So plan out your hereafter, like the people of this world plan out this world, right? You ask successful university students, what are you doing at university? If you ask someone like me when I was at university, I realized first year university that I need to go overseas and study. So I had a plan, which is the effortless B. You optimize getting a B without any effort. I don't recommend it for anyone unless you have a better plan than succeeding at university. So the people who are serious, they're very clear. I want to do this. I want to become this. I want to help people in this way. I want this career. And there's the slackers. We'd hang out at the cafeteria at the library. Well, we're in the library because it felt better to be in the cafeteria of the library than any of the other cafeterias. One, because we'd run into more Muslims. And number two, it gratified the self. That at least I would spend all day at the library. Didn't open a book, right? But you find people like that. Why? Because the people who accomplished something had a clear sense of purpose. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps connecting our worldly choices, like giving, to having clarity of our next worldly purpose. Right? That's something very important, which is why it is not incidental that in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرُسُلِهِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصِّدِّيقُونَ. And those, as for those who truly believe in Allah and His messengers, it is they who are truly the people of truth. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصِّدِّيقُونَ. Right? And this is connected. وَالْمُصَّدِّقِينَ, those who give consistently, purposefully in charity. Those are the people of truth. Right? So it connects giving in charity to having belief in Allah. Belief in Allah, Iman, is not accidentally defined as tasdeeq. Sadaqah is to give in charity. Sidq is to be true in state, speech, and conduct. Right? So sadaqah is charity. Tasdeeq is to confirm the truth. Sidq is to be true. A person of truth, right, is a Siddiq. The Imam of the Siddiqeen is Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? Who's a champion. And that's why Ustad Mukhtar Holland, one of the great translators to the English language, translated as, and the champions of truth. Which is a bit of a colorful American style translation, but that's what it is, the truly true. Or more pragmatic translation as made by Dr. Mustafa Khattab. They are the people of truth, right? The truly truthful, right? That they accepted the truth they embraced the truth, and they acted upon the truth by giving, which is why the Prophet ﷺ said, وَالصَّدَقَةُ burhan. Charity, i.e. giving charity, is proof that you believe and that you will act according to your belief. And as for those who truly believe in Allah and the last day, they are the people of truth. And one of the interpretations is that this refers to the people of the book who embrace the faith, right? Right? The people of the book who embrace the faith. That's a specific contextual meaning. Because in Medina, when the Prophet ﷺ reached Medina, for example, there were the Jewish peoples of Medina. They had been talking about the coming of a future prophet and this and that and the other, and we know his signs, we will believe in him and this and this. They even threatened the people of Medina, of Yathrib, then we'll fight you with him, etc. But when he came, most of them, despite knowing the truth, refused to believe, right? But some of them, like Abdullah ibn Salam and others, did. That's a contextual meaning. But more broadly, and as for those who believe in Allah and His messengers, it is they who are truly the people of truth. Imam Abu Hafs al-Nasafi says, if it is interpreted to being every believer, then it is referring to that your station with Allah, right, to be not just a mere believer, not merely a true believer, right? So you have al-mu'min, you have a person of faith. Then you have al-mu'minu sadiq, the true believer who acts upon their faith. But then you have not just a true believer, but a believer who is of the people of truth, right? The highest level believer, who is a champion of truth, who is realized in truth, who is not just a believer, not just a true believer, but they are an exemplar of truthfulness, a veracious believer, a siddiq, right? What is it that makes someone a siddiq? Here the verse tells us, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرُسُلِهِ, and those who truly believe in Allah and the last day. How do you truly believe? You go from mere affirmation of faith to acting upon what your faith entails, to being realized in the experiential fruits of faith. Those who truly believe, those who have hope and awe of Allah, those who have steadfastness and gratitude, those who have love and longing, those who have hope and trust and reliance upon Allah, those who have complete certitude. Those are the champions of truth. Right? And ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, that you be in a state of devotedness to Allah as though you behold Him. And then the verses continue, وَالشُّهَدَاءُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ لَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ وَنُورُهُمْ, and the martyrs with their Lord will have their reward and their light. And the martyrs are of two types. One are those who gave their lives in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Those who fought to defend and uphold the truth. Those are shuhada'ud dunya wal akhirah. The martyrs in this life, they're killed in the battlefield with Allah, meaning in truth, not in false brigandry, but in truth. But there's also those who lived lives dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and died in a state of dedicatedness to Allah. They count as martyrs. Or those who died in tests and tribulations, or those who died having sincerely asked Allah to be of the martyrs, which is why it is related from Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, that no ما سأل عبد الشهادة مخلصا من قلبه فمات على فراشه إلا كان شهيدا. That no servant asks Allah for martyrdom sincerely from their heart, and they die even on their own deathbed, on their own bed, except that they're written with Allah as a martyr. And Al-Hasan recited this verse, and this is mentioned by Imam al-Tabari in his tafsir, and it's narrated in the books of hadith by Al-Hakim in Al-Mustadrak and others. And it's similarly narrated in a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sahih Muslim. Right? Right? So the martyrs, right, which are those who died in the way of Allah or who led lives dedicated to the way of Allah, whether those seeking and spreading religious knowledge, those serving the public good, or those dedicated to serving their parents, or those dedicated to assisting those in need, or any of the many ways of good with complete dedication for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They die as martyrs. Those who die in tribulation die as martyrs if they have two qualities. Muhtasiban sabiran. Right? They seek the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and are steadfast in their patience, while taking the means of alleviation. Right? So these are states to aspire to. Try to be of the Siddiqeen, of the champions of truth. And the Siddiqeen are even higher than the martyrs, as we know from other verses in the Quran. أولئك الذين أنعم الله عليهم. Those are the ones whom Allah has blessed. من النبيين, of the prophets. والصديقين, and the people of truth, the veracious, the Siddiqeen. والشهداء, and the martyrs. والصالحين, and the righteous. وحسن أولئك رفيقا. And how good are these as one's close companions, meaning in the hereafter. So where should you strive to be? You should strive to be with these people. Right? Make me on the footsteps of the prophets. Prophethood is not acquired. You can't ask Allah to become a prophet, obviously. But you can ask to be of the Siddiqeen or the Shuhada, right? Or the Salihin, of the righteous servants of Allah. So there's a few lessons in these verses, right? Right? The people of truth, right, are those, right, are those, Imam Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, there are those who are true outwardly, whose outward action corresponds to their faith commitment, and whose inward state, the state of their heart, is true to their faith commitment, and whose words are true to their faith commitment. They say the good or remain silent, whose actions correspond to their faith commitment. Right? And then the martyrs, right? Who are martyrs in the battlefield, and those who lead lives dedicated to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or those who are faced with tribulations in this life and who do not object, who seek the reward from Allah and are steadfast in the ways pleasing to Allah. Now, interestingly, there's a category of person who's not mentioned here, of the people of good. Who are they? It mentions the highest rank of believers. Who's not mentioned? The common believer is not mentioned, right? What about the common believer? And this is one of the common themes of the Quran. That don't just be a plain vanilla Muslim. Well, I'm just a Muslim. Okay? That's like missing out. right? If you had a really smart friend, they could have either had a successful career or they could be doing something to benefiting others. What do you do? Well, I drive a cab. Why? Because you could drive a cab and do some really good things. Right? I have a friend who was planning out a novel. I don't know if they actually ever wrote it, but he had many good intentions. He used to drive a cab for multiple reasons. One, that doesn't hurt. His parents are extraordinarily wealthy. One year he was in Jordan. That year I thought we were living comfortably. That year we spent $6,000 for the whole year as our budget. He blew past $35,000 living in the same neighborhood as I did. I don't know how he did it, because we were paying pretty much the same rent. But you could have but imagine if they're not doing anything, neither to benefit themselves nor to benefit others. So that's a disappointment, because missing out is loss itself, even in worldly terms, right? And they say, al-fawatu khusran, missing out is loss. But in the same way, and you see this before Surah al-Hadid in Surah al-Waqi'ah, and Allah is nudging us that don't just be of the people of the right hand. As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun, the foremost, right? Strive to be of the foremost. Who are the foremost? Right? The siddiqeen, the shuhada. Be of those. Don't just be content with mere faith. Realize it. Reach its potential. Right? And then there's a warning about the disbelievers. But as for those who disbelieve and reject our signs, it is they who will be the residents of the hellfire. أولئك أصحاب الجحيم. Right? And what is one of their characteristics is that they went against the people of truth, went against those who gave their lives in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, says Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, their consequence is the opposite of that consequence. And then one of the many truly memorable verses of Surah al-Hadid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in verse number 20,
اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب وله وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حطاما وفي الآخرة عذاب شديد ومغفرة من الله ورضوان وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اعلموا, know with certainty that this worldly life is no more than play, لعب, just playing around. وله, and amusement, right? Entertaining yourselves. Doing something that gives you fleeting joy but has no beneficial consequence. An amusement. Wazinatun, and luxury. Right? What are you concerned about? Well, the company that makes my leather bag has come up with a new model. I need to get the new model. Why? Because it's bigger than the one I have. Now, the one you have, do you use it fully? Not really. Do you really like the bag? No, there's half a dozen things I don't like in it. There'll probably be a dozen things in the new bag you don't like. But our concerns are, I need, but what you need are just luxuries. We need to upgrade our minivan. Why? Because the new model, there's a time some while back when minivans only opened from one door. If you remember way back when. Then people are thinking, oh, I need to get a minivan that opens on both sides. Now I need to get a fridge where I can get water. Like, is it that difficult to open the fridge and get the water? It also produces ice. Do you like ice in your water? No. Right? But, so much, and that's zina. That's just adornment, luxury. وَتَفَاخُرٌ. Right? And boasting. And mutual boasting. Sufyan al-Thawri was walking with his students down an alleyway, and there's fancy homes on both sides. Some of his students started looking up. He said, lower your gazes. It is only because of gazes such as these that waste such as that arises. Right? Half of the things that people spend their money on, they don't even derive any pleasure from. Right? And mutual boasting. Like, people like talking tech with me. So I need to get the new such and such computer because these new processors, they're so amazing. I said, how much graphic design do you do? None. How much video editing do you do? I've never done that. Do you do any fancy engineering applications or anything that requires a lot of processors? He said, no, I just check my email, surf the internet, watch a few things online. Has your computer ever been slow in doing those things? I said, no. Why do you want it? It's mutual boasting. You can show I've got the newest, blingiest device, right? And that's how we spend our times. And none of it brings any satisfaction, right? وَتَكَاثُرٌ, right? And competition with one another in wealth and children, right? And this takathur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ. You have been busied away by your vying to amass the worldly, حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ, until you reach your graves. كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. Then indeed shall you know. ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. Then indeed you shall know. And in children, not just in the number of children, but my son goes to this and that place. My daughter speaks fluent Italian. Okay. Whatever. Right? If you actually think about the content of what is being boasted about, it's ridiculous. Because nobody has ever said that the questioning on the Day of Judgment will be in Mandarin or Spanish or Italian. Although one of the strangest things ever stated in Islamic scholarship is some of the scholars, for some strange reasons, argued that the questioning on the Day of Resurrection will be in Syriac. So you know about that? So Imam Suyuti, I think, wrote a line of poetry, وَمَنْ أَعْجَمِ مَا سَمِعَتْهُ الْآذَانُ يعني أن سؤال القبر, the question of the grave will be in Syriac. أن سؤال القبر بالسرياني. Of course, it's just baseless. But who cares? If anything that doesn't really have ultimate consequences in the hereafter, now if it's connected to a good intention, that you're planning to move to Italy and you want your children to be able to pursue their worldly good, or be able to engage in worldly good for themselves and others, then that's good. Because there's a meaning of good in it. But much of what we pursue is not related to that. And then there's a metaphor for this. كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ. It is like, the metaphor of this life is like rain that causes plants to grow to the delight of the planters. Right? And here, أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. Kuffar here refers to the farmers. Because kufr comes from covering over the truth. And farmers, or literally planters, are called kuffar because they bury the seeds in the soil and they cover them over. But the word is used provocatively here because the one who becomes attached to this worldly life, it's as if they are denying its reality, right? This is like the rain that causes plants to grow to the delight of the planters, right? Right? So they grow, but later the plants dry up and you see them wither, then they are reduced to mere chaff. Right? When you see the leaves fall, consider how they were in the beginning of spring. Right? But do not let the dazzle of the adornment of this life delude you from its end. Right? Rather, be Abrahamic in your gaze. Sayyidina Ibrahim looked from one phenomenal reality to another. And what did he conclude? لا أحب الآفلين. I do not love things that are perishing. Right? I do not love things that are perishing. That yeah, partake of it, but no, it's going. No, it's going. There's much to reflect on this metaphor. وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ, and in the hereafter, there'll be either severe punishment or forgiveness. Right? وَمَغْفِرَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ, and forgiveness from Allah. وَرِضْوَانٌ, and absolute good pleasure. Right? وَمَغْفِرَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ, and forgiveness from Allah. Right? Like it's as if Allah is serving it to you. Here you go, here is forgiveness. So why would you refuse it? And the hereafter is forgiveness from Allah. He has prepared it for you. All you have to do is just come take it. How much forgiveness? Unconditioned. Waridwan. Rida is good pleasure. You're pleased with something, you say, you have rida. But ridwan is complete good pleasure, which is to be pleased and satisfied unconditionally, eternally. Right? That's like, what a stark choice. وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. Whereas the life of this world is no more than the delusion of enjoyment. You think it's enjoyable, but all of its pleasures are fleeting. That amazing baklava, how many bites does it last? Yeah, it depends how hungry you are. Either one bite or two. If you really nibble at it, maybe 3 or 4. How long does the taste last? Yeah, not too long. Right? That's the nature of this life. You're craving that cake, even if you had half the cake. How long would it take to eat half? Sorry for making you guys hungry. Half a Black Forest cake. You took your time. Said, okay, you fasted all day and you had half a Black Forest cake for dinner. Don't adopt poor culinary practice, poor dietary practices, but let's say you did it. You took your time, even if you took half an hour eating it. That's just fleeting pleasure. Who spends half an hour eating their cake? Right? It's just fleeting. And then you pay the price too. Right? Because your blood sugar, it does a roller coaster, and then you feel exhausted the next day because of your blood sugar. Yeah, spikes up, but then spikes down. All kinds of crazy things happen. It's just the delusion. Right? It's of enjoyment. So here, this is a call to reflect, right? It's one of those verses that one could spend, and some of the early Muslims, verses like this that struck them, they would keep going back. And we need to learn how to deepen our reflection on these kinds of verses, right? To reflect on the metaphor, not just in the abstract, but in my own life. That how much of these things do I have in my own life, right? Know that this worldly life is just play and entertainment, right? One of the contextual meanings of this is know the fleeting reality of this life. So what is it a call to? It's a call to live a life of seeking Allah, of living the consequences of your faith. How? By giving in the way of Allah, by sacrificing in the way of Allah, by doing something meaningful in life, rather than living with the delusion that you can live a life of infinite jest, right? Of infinite jest. Right? And this is what troubled so many sincere seeking minds, and troubled them about the reality of this life. Right? Rather, be someone who lives a life of giving and sacrifice. Right? And what is it that causes one not to live a life of sacrifice? Not to strive in the way of Allah, not to seek religious knowledge, not to serve creation for the sake of the Creator. It is these delusionary worldly attachments, right? Play and entertainment, right? Play and entertainment. People think that the greatest possible thing happened. Why? Because someone beat someone else at a sport that is not even permissible. Pummeling someone in the face while largely naked. So yeah, it's as if, suddenly, we've established all this great good. Just because someone says, Alhamdulillah, half a dozen times. And what did you end up doing? How will this count for you in the hereafter? With no offense to anyone who says Alhamdulillah. Right? It's mere play, like the play of children. And amusement, like what teens do. Right? They just amuse themselves. They're not doing anything of significance. Right? Or adornment, like worldly women engage in. And we're talking about worldly women, not the women that matter, the women of the kind that are mentioned in the Quran, like say the great women of the Quran, right? And the righteous women whose concern is not on the mere luxuries, right? And boasting with one another, like the boasting of the worldly with their peers, right? And vying with one another, like those whose ambitions are limited to their careers. So-and-so bought a big house, we need to get a big house. Right? And these are the states that affect people till they reach old age. Between mere play, then amusement, then from amusement, when they start working, they start acquiring luxury. When they start acquiring luxury, then they start boasting with each other about it. But then they want to outdo each other, so then they vie in wealth and children. And they get too old to do anything with it. Even in worldly terms, all of this, how much of it do you get to enjoy? What do you enjoy? And you ask people. And there's some wonderful books about, they interviewed people who reached, who were in terminal illness. What are the things that benefit, that you look back fondly in life? None of them have to do with money. Sometimes they need some money. It's those experiences when you're with family, those experiences when you're with friend. It is those socially memorable moments. In the case of the religious, the spiritually memorable moments. Someone went on Hajj, someone went on Umrah. You know, those are the things that matter. Right? Right? And what does this require? Right? Some of the ulama of tafsir mentioned that if one reflects and takes heed, right, and rectifies one's aims, one realizes that the merely fleeting is not worth pursuing on its own. Right? From the excellence of a person's Islam, from an excellence of a person's submission to God, is leaving all that is not of consequence to them. Right? How does this benefit me in my worldly goals or in my next worldly goals? What are the worldly goals? What is the good of this life that I'm seeking that will be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And my next worldly good, what do I want in the hereafter? That's what's worth seeking. So someone suggests a quote unquote good job for you, but in worldly terms, it's not worth it. Yeah, it pays more, but it puts you distant from family, distant from community, distant from the sources of religious benefit, distant from your ability to be of service and benefit to others. What could you do with that money on its own? So this should affect one's choices. And rather, one realizes that I'm on a journey to the hereafter. And in this life, I'm striving to maximize the meaningful good. Otherwise, one is in states of loss. And then this beautiful metaphor, right? The beautiful metaphor of rain and plants, right? Rain and plants. And they say that the rain, it's the rain around us, but also the rain around us. That there's plants that emerge and they die, right? But what does the believer, right? There's nabat, there are plants that grow and they perish. But what does the believer plant in this life? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Ibrahim, the good word is like the good tree whose roots are firm and whose branches are in the sky. Right? So we don't plant the fleeting vegetation. Right? That I did something, I earned some money, I spent some money, I had a big pizza and it's gone and that was my joy. Right? That is fleeting pleasure. What are you left with? Nothing. In the cold and rain, it'll perish and wither. And it's reduced to mere chaff, if it's reduced to anything. Rather, the believer roots their faith and cultivates it. So they grow a good tree whose roots are firm and whose branches in the sky. If the roots are firm and the branches are in the sky, what is the shape of the tree? What would the shape of the tree be? It's an upright tree. Right? This is why the Prophet ﷺ asked the companions, there's a tree of the trees of the countryside that most resembles the believer. And this question took place in Medina. The Sahaba were probably surrounded in all four directions by this tree. But they made every tree that they could think of except the tree that surrounded them. This is the date palm tree. And the senior most companions are there, and we know for sure Sayyidina Umar was there. It's his son, Abdullah ibn Umar, who realized that it is the date palm tree. But he didn't say anything out of deference to his elders. And he wasn't asked. They couldn't guess what it was. The Prophet ﷺ told them, truly it's the date palm tree. Afterwards, the hadith is in the book of knowledge in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari. So afterwards, Abdullah ibn Umar told his father, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, that, oh father, as soon as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it, I knew which tree it was. He said, had you told him, had you mentioned it, it would have meant more than such and such to me, out of gratitude to Allah. But it's not that the believer resembles the tree. The tree resembles the believer. Why? Because the believer is supposed to be the standard of excellence. Right? But the believer strives to be like the good tree, whose roots are firm, so it is not affected by the seasons of the worldly. Right? That it goes up in spring and it comes to nothing in the fall. It suffers in the heat of summer and it's dead in the dead of winter. But rather it's like the good tree, whose roots are firm and whose branches are in the sky. It gives good fruit in every season by leave of its Lord. Right? That's the date palm tree. Even when there's almost nothing, it's still fruitful. Date palm trees can grow in the dry of the desert and they still give fruit. Even if you kick the tree, it just gives you fruit. Every part of it is beneficial. If you cut the date palm tree down, it still benefits you. You benefit from every part of the tree. Right? So be a tree. Right? And whose branches are in the sky because it's yearning for the eternal. Right? It's yearning for the eternal, but it bears worldly fruit that all benefit from. It gives shade, it gives comfort, it brings benefit. Right? Right? Whereas also we see the fleetingness of everything around us. This too is perishing. When you build a house, it's not coming with me. Seek of the worldly, knowing it's not going to last. Because what is the horizon of the believer? The horizon of the believer is eternity. Right? And compare it to the hereafter. Right? Compare it to the hereafter. Because how does the believer plan with the horizon of the hereafter? You're not trying to maximize your worldly worth. You're trying to maximize your eternal net worth. Right? And in the hereafter, there is either severe punishment or forgiveness from Allah and absolute good pleasure. Whereas the life of this world is the delusion of enjoyment. Right? But this, for whom is there forgiveness from Allah and great good pleasure? To the one who prepares and acts for it. Right? Whereas the life of this world is nothing but the delusion of enjoyment. Right? This is the one who all they sought was the fleeting. They die. The fleeting things are gone. What do they come with on the day of resurrection? Right? Right? It was delusion. It was delusion. Right? They enjoyed it fleetingly. And even the fleeting joy, even in worldly terms, did not last in worldly terms. Right? And if you read about achieving happiness in this world, none of these things mention. Not wealth, not luxury, not entertainment. None of it brings happiness, even in worldly terms, even for the worldly. Let alone if you consider the hereafter. Right? It's nothing but some joys that you enjoy, but they destroy you. They destroy you. They destroy you, one, because they just turn you away completely, or they disadvantage you. They disadvantage you. Right? Because you are not created for this world. You are created for a much higher purpose than all of this. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us here. Know the delusionary reality of this world. And know that what is its delusion? Its delusion is when it is sought just for itself. Right? If it's sought out of gratitude to Allah, it's not delusion. It is faith. When it's sought out of some pursuit of good, it is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not a call. So you wanted that steak? Go. Have the steak. But think about your friend who's going through a tough time. Say, why don't we go grab steak together? Invite somebody over. Direct what you seek in this life towards meaningful good. Towards meaningful good. Right? And it has eternal consequence then. It has eternal consequence. Spending on your family for the sake of Allah is beloved to Allah. Earning to spend in the ways of good is beloved to Allah. Right? There are so many opportunities. So plan your hereafter in this way. Right? Plan your hereafter in this way. Right? And this is why in regards to this, Imam al-Qushayri in his tafsir about وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ, whereas the life of this world is no more than the delusion of enjoyment. He says, الدُّنْيا حَقِيرَةٌ, the merely worldly is vile, is paltry. وَأَحْقَرُ مِنْهَا قَدْرًا طَالِبُهَا, and more paltry, more insignificant than the merely worldly is the one who seeks it. Because the world has, can have some benefit, right? But the one who seeks something paltry is even more paltry than what they sought, right? And even more insignificant than the one who runs out after this world is the one who tries to vie with those competing for the insignificant. Because one person actually wanted the insignificant thing, so they chased after it. So it's insignificant, but at least they had some idea why they wanted it. Why do you want it? Just because they want it. You're even more foolish. Right? So he says, وَالطَّالِبُ الْجِيفَ لَيْسَ لَهُ خَطَرٌ. The one who seeks a dead carcass has no consequence. Right? And he says, of the worst type of worldly people are those who have the things of this world, but they're stingy with them. Those who are stingy with them. Because if you're true, you would give. If you sought it with good intentions, then you would give. So, but what is the delusionary nature of this life? He says, وَهَذِي الدُّنْيَا الْمَذْمُومَةِ هِيَ الَّتِي تَشْغَلُ الْعَبْدَ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ. This world, this blameworthy worldliness is that which busies you away from Allah. That which is sought for God and good is not blameworthy. So if Allah facilitates the matters of this life for you, you're having success in your career, you're having things open up for you in your worldly life, that is pleasing to Allah if you seek it with a good intention, in a good way, towards good goals. But make an eternal plan for it. Make an eternal plan for it. And then we'll see the call in the next verse of rushing to the forgiveness of Allah and a paradise vaster than the heavens and the earth, prepared for those who have truly believed in Allah and His messengers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those people. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Any question? Yeah. Yeah. No, so that's why, so then this is an irony in many Muslim countries, right? That an inordinate percentage of women go into medicine.
And the other thing is, I don't mean to interrupt you, is that like a lot of Muslim women in the Muslim countries, they can fill up the labor force and take care of the issues, like health issues, but they're still stuck in this cycle.
Yeah. So it was not sought with concern for the pleasure of Allah and the good. Whereas those same countries, there's a major shortage. Even you ask the scholars, say, yeah, we need no more female doctors, female nurses, female this, female that. But they don't. Why? Because the standards are other than God and good. Right? And anything that's outside of that framework is delusion. Right? At some degree or the other. Any questions online? So there's one question here that, could you tell us a little more about who are these champions of truth, these veracious, the Siddiqun that are mentioned, and those who believe in Allah, those who have truly believed in Allah and His messengers, they are the Siddiqun, they are the champions of truth. So Imam al-Qushayri tells us who are the people of truth. He says that a Siddiq is an emphatic form of someone who is true, right? So he says, the Siddiq, the truly true, are those whose inward and outward are aligned with each other. So they outwardly pursue the good, but inwardly they uphold the good, right? So they don't just do the good that Allah's pleasure is sought by, but they genuinely are seeking Allah by it, right? But they're also true in their striving. They're true in their striving, right? So the truly true, the people of truth, are those who pursue the most difficult things, and who don't just give themselves the easy way out, right? So, there's these difficult choices to make. That, you attended the janazah and you're like, and you could easily show up to work half an hour late because you're working from home anyways. Like, I'm busy. There's so many things to do at work. But when you're going to go home, before starting your car, you're going to order some food. You're going to say, now is my lunch break. And then you're going to start work an hour later. How long would it take to spend half an hour at the burial? Right? So you don't just give yourself the easy way out. Right? And they don't make excuses for themselves in these kind of things, right? What's the right thing to do? Make yourself do it. That's from the signs of the people of truth, right? And one of the Prophet ﷺ said, none of you truly believes until their inclinations align with what I have come with. Right? And they say that the one who in their tired states is on the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that is someone who is true in their religiosity. Right? Because adab is not what you do in public. So, you got a burger and you're starving, but you're with some friends, so you eat it with real grace and elegance. You take a little bite and you put it down and you're like, so how are you doing and how are you? You know, so you have adab. But if that same burger came at home, the first bite, you'd be halfway through into the burger, right? And you'd still be biting when you'd put a quarter more into your mouth, right? So trueness is not how you are just in public, but also how you are in private, right? When you're tired, how do you act? How do you conduct yourself, right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us facilitation and steadfastness and goodness. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.